The restaurant was not just any restaurant. It was the most expensive place in the city, the kind of place people entered only on special occasions, birthdays, anniversaries, business deals, or celebrations of big achievements. Everything inside looked luxurious. The lighting was warm and golden, coming from chandeliers that sparkled like tiny stars. The tables were covered with white cloth, smooth and perfect, with shining silver cutlery and crystal glasses that reflected the lights beautifully. The guests inside were the type who dressed in designer clothes and wore expensive watches. They spoke loudly, laughed confidently, and ordered dishes without ever asking for the price. They were people who lived comfortable lives, who rarely worried about bills or work schedules. They sipped wine slowly, ate slowly, and spent money easily. It was an evening of elegance, wealth, and pride. But among all that luxury, there was someone who did not belong to that world: Emma, the waitress. Emma worked at the restaurant 6 days a week. She wore a black uniform with a white apron, her hair tied neatly, her shoes comfortable but not stylish. She moved quickly, balancing plates, refilling glasses, and listening to endless requests. She was polite to everyone but mostly invisible, like a shadow moving between wealthy people. Emma did not hate her job, but she found it exhausting. She worked because she needed the money, not because she enjoyed serving people who often looked down on her. Some guests were kind. They smiled, said thank you, and treated her like a human being. But many were rude, snapping fingers, complaining loudly, or acting as if Emma and the other workers existed only to obey them. She learned to ignore insults, to smile even when she was tired, and to stay calm no matter how unfair people were. That was part of her job. People who could afford to eat here expected perfection, even if they themselves acted imperfectly. On this particular night, the restaurant was especially busy. A large business party had reserved half the dining area. Men and women gathered around long tables, dressed in suits and elegant dresses. They laughed loudly, clinked glasses, and talked about money, investments, and expensive vacations. Emma listened as she served them, hearing sentences like, "We closed $1 million deal last week. I bought a new house just because I didn't like the view from the old one. My watch cost more than some people's cars." Conversations like these were normal here. Emma didn't react. She kept her face polite and her thoughts silent. In the corner of the room stood a grand piano, shiny, black, and beautiful. It was there mostly for decoration. Sometimes on weekends, a hired musician played soft music, but tonight it stood silent. The lid was lifted, showing golden strings inside, but the keys had not been touched at all. Emma walked past the piano many times that night. Every time she saw it, something inside her stirred, a memory, a feeling, a longing. But she pushed it away. This was not the time or place for those thoughts. She had work to do. As she served the wealthy guests, she noticed how different their world was from hers. Their laughter was carefree because their lives were easy. They didn't have to worry about rent, bills, or responsibilities. They weren't saving money. They were spending it without thinking. For them, this evening was entertainment. For Emma, it was survival, but Emma did not envy them. She had learned something important in life. Money can make things easier, but it cannot make people kinder. She saw rich people yell, complain, gossip, and insult each other just as easily as anyone else. The only difference was that they did it while wearing expensive clothes. She continued working, balancing plates on her tray, weaving through tightly arranged chairs, and remembering every order without writing it down. She had developed impressive skills over time: speed, memory, and patience. But no one cared. They did not see her as talented. They saw her as a server, nothing more. Sometimes, when Emma arrived home at night, she cried from exhaustion, but she always woke up and went back. She couldn't afford to quit. Life had given her responsibilities at a young age, and she accepted them without complaint. As she moved between tables, she overheard a businessman bragging loudly. His name was Mr. Dalton, and he was known for being rich, confident, and sometimes cruel. He laughed louder than anyone, told jokes that weren't funny, and expected attention constantly. People laughed because he had money, not because he was amusing. He noticed the piano and said, "I don't know why they keep that thing here. None of these servers know how to use it." A few people laughed. Emma pretended she didn't hear. Another guest said, "Maybe one of the waiters can play a song." More laughter followed. Emma walked by, placing a plate on the table. Mr. Dalton looked at her and smirked. He didn't know anything about her, but he felt powerful enough to assume she had no talent, no story, and no dreams. Emma kept her eyes lowered, acting calm. But inside, a small spark of anger flared, one that she tried to hide. She was tired of being judged by people who didn't know her at all. The evening continued like this: expensive food, rich conversation, and Emma moving silently between tables, unnoticed except when someone needed something. No one knew that behind her quiet face was someone who once dreamed of playing that piano, not as a joke, but as a passion. No one knew that her relationship with music ran deeper than anyone in the room could imagine. To them, she was just a waitress. To herself, she was someone who had once wanted to make people gasp, not because of her appearance but because of her music. But fate had a strange way of opening doors. And tonight, in this elegant place full of wealthy strangers, something unexpected would begin, something that would change Emma's life and shock every person who had laughed at her. The night continued with loud conversations, expensive drinks, and forced laughter. The restaurant was filled with noise, but Emma's world was quiet. She moved from table to table, refilling glasses, placing plates, and collecting used dishes without being noticed. She was used to being invisible. She had learned that in places like this, waiters were seen but not valued. At the main table, Mr. Dalton sat with a group of businessmen and wealthy guests. He was the kind of man who enjoyed attention and power more than anything else. He liked showing he was richer, smarter, and more important than everyone around him. People laughed at his jokes even when they weren't funny, because no one wanted to disagree with a rich man. At one point, Mr. Dalton pointed toward the grand piano and said loudly, "Who even put that thing here? It's just sitting there doing nothing." A few people looked over and shrugged. Another man said, "Maybe someone should play it, it's a waste just sitting there." Mr. Dalton laughed and replied, "What should one of the waiters try? They probably don't even know how to use a fork properly." People laughed, though some shifted uncomfortably. Rich people liked to pretend they were polite, but cruelty often came wrapped in humor. Emma passed by carrying a tray of drinks. She didn't react, but she heard every word. She kept her eyes down, reminding herself not to take anything personally. She had heard worse, but Mr. Dalton wasn't finished. He enjoyed insulting people because it made him feel strong. When Emma returned to their table with a bottle of wine, he looked at her closely, as if she was a new toy he wanted to examine. "You there?" he said, pointing rudely. Emma stopped. "Yes, sir." Mr. Dalton nodded toward the piano. "Can you play that thing?" Emma hesitated. I don't know." She wasn't lying, but she also wasn't telling the full truth. She didn't want attention, she didn't want trouble. Mr. Dalton smirked. "Come on, don't be shy, go play something." "What?" Emma blinked. "I'm working." "Oh, come on," he said loudly so everyone could hear. "You can take 2 minutes away from carrying plates, unless you're scared." More laughter. Emma felt heat on her face, not embarrassment but anger. She didn't like being mocked. She didn't like being treated like she was less than human. But she also didn't want to cause trouble for her boss. She knew refusing a wealthy customer could lead to problems. She stayed calm and said, "I'm sorry, sir, I have work to do." Her polite tone should have ended the conversation, but Mr. Dalton didn't like being told no, especially by someone he thought was beneath him. He leaned back, smiling wickedly. "I'll make you a deal," he said loudly. "If you can play even one song without embarrassing yourself, I'll leave a $1,000 tip on the table." People gasped. $1,000 was nothing to Mr. Dalton, but to Emma it was more than a week's salary. It could pay rent, bills, groceries, things rich people never thought about. Emma stared at him, unsure if he was joking or serious. She didn't respond. Mr. Dalton said louder, "And if you refuse, we'll assume you can't play. Which means all your little excuses are just that, excuses." His voice carried through the restaurant. Heads turned, eyes watched. Emma felt trapped. She could either say no and be humiliated, or say yes and risk making a fool of herself. Another guest chuckled. "Come on, let her go, it'll be fun." Fun for who? Emma thought bitterly. Her hands shook lightly, but she kept them hidden behind her tray. She hated this moment. She hated how money gave people power to push others into uncomfortable corners. She looked at Mr. Dalton and asked, "What if I don't want to?" "What?" He laughed loudly. "Then we'll all know the answer. You can't play." He leaned closer, lowering his voice slightly as if sharing a secret. "And that's fine. Not everyone has talent. Some people are just made to serve." What? Those words hit Emma hard, not because she believed them, but because he believed them. He looked at her like she was a chair, a fork, a napkin, just an object. Before she could reply, Mr. Dalton raised his wine glass and announced, "So waitress, I dare you to play the piano, right here, right now." Silence spread like a wave. People stared, some were curious, some were uncomfortable, a few smiled, eager for entertainment. Emma felt her throat tighten. The room suddenly felt too hot, too bright, too loud, even though everything had gone quiet. She didn't know what to do. She didn't want to satisfy Mr. Dalton's arrogance. But she also didn't want to walk away feeling powerless. Her mind raced. She thought about the piano, she thought about music, she thought about who she used to be before life got complicated. She whispered, "Why are you doing this?" "What?" Mr. Dalton shrugged. "Because I can." Those 3 words said everything about the kind of person he was. Emma looked around the room. Everyone's eyes were on her. She hated attention, but something in her heart flickered, something stubborn, something fierce. She didn't want applause, she didn't want money, she wanted respect. And in that moment she began to consider the dare, not because she wanted to impress rich people, but because she refused to let them define her. She took a slow breath. Her voice was quiet but steady. "What happens if I don't embarrass myself?" she asked. Mr. Dalton grinned. He thought he had already won. "Then the whole room will know," he said, "that I was wrong about you." What? Emma didn't answer, but the spark inside her grew stronger. For the first time that night, she wasn't thinking like a waitress. She was thinking like someone who had something to prove. And she wondered what would happen if she let her music speak for her, even for just a moment. When Emma went home that night, she could not stop thinking about what happened at the restaurant. She lay on her small bed, staring at the ceiling, hearing the sound of Mr. Dalton's voice over and over again in her mind. "Some people are just made to serve." Those words hurt her more than anything else, not because they were true, but because they were cruel. Emma knew she was more than a uniform, more than a waitress. But the world didn't always care about who you really were. Sometimes, the world only cared about what job you did or how much money you had. Emma had once dreamed of a different life, a life filled with music. When she was younger, she studied piano seriously. She practiced for hours every day, sometimes until her fingers hurt. She wasn't just good, she was gifted. People told her she had talent, and she believed it. She imagined herself performing on big stages, wearing elegant dresses, with audiences listening in silence, waiting for every note. Her parents saw her talent too, and they encouraged her. They saved money to pay for lessons, even when they were struggling. They believed Emma could be someone great. They believed music could take her somewhere beautiful. But life doesn't always follow dreams. When Emma was 16, everything fell apart. Her father got sick, very sick. Hospital bills came, bills the family couldn't afford. Her mother took night shifts. Emma quit music school to help at home. She got a part-time job washing dishes at a cafe. She sold her piano because they needed money for medicine. Giving up the piano was one of the hardest moments of her life. She didn't cry in front of anyone, but when she was alone, she sobbed silently. It felt like she wasn't just losing an instrument, she was losing a part of herself. Her father passed away months later. Life changed again. She had to take care of her younger sister, Lily, while her mother worked extra shifts. Music became a memory, not a future. There was no time, no money, and no space for dreams. Years passed. Emma stopped playing entirely. She couldn't afford lessons or instruments. She focused on surviving, paying bills, feeding her family, staying strong. She didn't think about performing anymore. If someone asked about her past, she simply said, "Life happened," and left it at that. But sometimes, late at night, when the world was quiet, she imagined her fingers moving across the keys again. She imagined the sound of music flowing out of her hands, filling the room, making her heart feel lighter. She missed it deeply, desperately, but she didn't allow herself to think about it too much. Dreams hurt when you can't chase them. Working at the restaurant was not glamorous, but it paid the rent. Emma didn't complain, even when people were rude. She learned to swallow her pride and stay calm. She trained herself to smile when she wanted to cry, apologize when she wasn't wrong, and stay polite when customers treated her like she was invisible. But under her quiet exterior, Emma still carried a musician's heart, sensitive, passionate, emotional. Music hadn't left her, it had simply gone silent. That was why Mr. Dalton's words cut so deeply. He didn't know anything about her, but he spoke as if he understood her worth. He looked at her uniform and assumed she was nothing. He saw her job and decided that was all she was. He had no idea about the years of sacrifice, heartbreak, talent, and strength hidden behind her calm face. Emma didn't tell anyone about her past because she didn't want sympathy. She didn't want people to look at her as if she was broken. She wanted people to see her as capable, independent, and strong. She had rebuilt her life once and she could do it again, but something changed inside her that night. The dare wasn't just a joke anymore. It wasn't just about playing a piano, it was about reclaiming a part of herself she had lost. When Mr. Dalton mocked her, he accidentally touched the wound she kept hidden. He assumed she had no talent. He assumed she had nothing to offer. He assumed she was someone who should stay silent. He didn't know she had once been a promising pianist. He didn't know she had performed in competitions, won awards, and dreamed of music schools and stages. He didn't know she had sacrificed everything for family. He didn't know she wasn't afraid of the piano. She was afraid of what it would make her feel again. Emma often avoided music because it reminded her of a life she didn't get to live. Playing again meant touching emotions she had buried. It meant remembering who she used to be and who she could have been. And that was painful. Yet when she sat alone that night, she realized something important. She didn't want to hide anymore. She didn't want her past to be a secret. She didn't want to carry her talent like a forgotten memory. She wanted to feel alive again, not for applause, not for money, not for revenge, but because music was still her voice even if she hadn't used it in years. Emma closed her eyes and imagined sitting at the piano in the restaurant. She imagined placing her fingers on the keys, feeling them respond. She imagined the sound filling the room, silencing the arrogance, surprising the people who judged her. She imagined playing not to prove them wrong, but to prove herself right. For years, she had believed that her chance at a musical life was gone forever. But maybe it was. Maybe talent didn't disappear just because life got hard. Maybe passion waited patiently to be called back. Emma understood something that night. She didn't owe anyone a performance, but she owed herself one. The dare was more than a challenge. It was a doorway back to something she loved. And although she was scared, she knew one thing for certain. She didn't want to walk away from the piano again without playing. The next evening at the restaurant, people were already whispering about the dare from the night before. Some guests had heard about it, some had witnessed it, and a few were secretly hoping that tonight would bring entertainment. Wealthy people loved drama, as long as it did not involve them personally. Emma arrived early for her shift, tired but calm. She tied her apron, fixed her hair, and reminded herself that she was here to work, not to impress anyone. But deep inside, she felt different. A quiet determination lived in her chest. She hadn't promised anyone she would play, but she had promised something to herself. She wouldn't run away again. The grand piano stood exactly where it had stood last night, silent, glossy, almost waiting. Emma walked past it with a glance, feeling her stomach twist. Part of her wanted to pretend nothing had happened, to avoid attention, to stay invisible. But another part of her, a part she hadn't felt in years, wanted to sit down, touch the keys, and let her fingers remember who she used to be. Mr. Dalton arrived later than most guests. He entered loudly, surrounded by people who seemed eager to please him. He talked about stock markets, cars, and expensive vacations. He didn't mention the dare right away, but every time Emma walked past, he looked at her with a smirk, like a cat waiting for the mouse to panic. Emma served drinks and smiled politely, but her heart beat fast each time she sensed his eyes on her. She didn't want this moment anymore to be about proving something to him. She wanted it to be about reclaiming what she lost. As dinner continued, Mr. Dalton grew louder and more confident. He enjoyed performing for his friends, showing off his jokes and wealth. When he noticed Emma walking by with plates in her hands, he tapped his glass loudly and said, "So about last night." The table laughed immediately, expecting something cruel or entertaining. Emma froze. Mr. Dalton leaned back in his chair and said loudly, "Did you think about my offer, or are you still scared of that piano?" People looked at Emma, expecting embarrassment, fear, or a quick excuse. Emma put the plates down gently and looked at him with calm eyes. "I'm not scared of the piano," she said softly. Mr. Dalton raised his eyebrows, surprised by her steady voice. "Then go on," he said, pointing toward the stage. "Play something." His voice sounded casual, but his expression was full of challenge, confidence that she would decline and that he would win again. Emma didn't want to be entertainment. She didn't want to be a tool in his game. But she also didn't want to leave the piano silent. Not tonight. She took a slow breath and nodded. "Fine." A silence spread across the room. Some guests stopped eating. Others turned in their chairs to watch. Even the waitstaff paused, unsure what was happening. Emma walked toward the piano with small, steady steps. Her hands shook a little and her breath danced in her chest, but she didn't turn back. She sat down on the bench slowly, letting her hand rest on the cool surface of the piano. For a moment she didn't move. She simply listened to the silence, to her heart, to the memories rushing back. Then she lifted the lid and placed her fingers gently on the keys. She played a single note. It echoed through the restaurant like a whisper, soft but clear. People leaned forward, suddenly attentive. Emma started with a slow, haunting melody. Her fingers moved carefully at first, as if testing the water. The piano responded, slightly uneven, a bit out of tune, but alive. She continued, and the music unfolded like a story, sad, hopeful, honest. The room changed. People who had been talking loudly minutes ago now sat perfectly still. Forks stopped in midair. Eyes widened. The restaurant felt less like a dining room and more like a theater. Mr. Dalton stared, stunned, unable to hide his surprise. He had expected clumsy noise, childish attempts, maybe laughter. He had never imagined skill. He had never imagined emotion. Emma's hands gained confidence with each note. She let the music guide her. She played not to show off, but to release everything locked inside her for years: pain, love, memory, longing. Some guests looked at her face and saw something remarkable. She wasn't performing for approval. She was remembering who she was. Her music filled every corner of the restaurant, floating above dishes, glasses, and conversations, turning an ordinary evening into something magical. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was soft, gentle, and full of soul, the kind of sound that made people feel something without knowing why. A woman near the front wiped her eyes quietly. A man put down his phone, too moved to pretend he was. Even the busboy stopped clearing tables and stood listening, amazed. Emma ended the piece with a slow, fading chord. Silence followed, heavy, stunned silence. And then, as if everyone had forgotten how to breathe, the entire room erupted into applause. Not polite applause, real applause, warm, shocked, emotional applause. Emma didn't smile proudly. She just breathed deeply, feeling a strange mixture of relief and ache. She had only played one song, but it felt like she had run for miles. She stood up quietly, ready to return to work, but people continued clapping, cheering, even shouting her name though most didn't know it. For once, Emma wasn't invisible. She glanced toward Mr. Dalton. His face was pale, his ego bruised, his arrogance shattered. He didn't clap, he didn't smile. He just stared at her as if he couldn't believe what he had witnessed. And in that moment, something powerful happened. Emma realized that the piano hadn't embarrassed her. It had exposed many others without her saying a single word. She walked back to her tray, silent and humble, but inside, something was awake again, something strong, something alive, something beautiful. The applause in the restaurant finally began to fade, but the emotion in the air did not disappear. People still sat in disbelief, staring at Emma as if she had just done something impossible. They had come that night expecting expensive food, fancy wine, and polite music from the speakers. None of them expected a waitress to silence the entire room with nothing but a piano. Emma stood still for a moment, unsure what to do with so many eyes on her. She wasn't used to attention, she wasn't used to admiration. Usually when people looked at her, they looked through her, not at her. Now the attention felt heavy, almost frightening. She gave a small, shy nod and returned to work, even though her hands were shaking. One woman reached out and touched her arm gently. "That was beautiful," she whispered. Another customer said, "I had no idea you could play like that." Emma smiled weakly, not knowing what to say. She didn't play for compliments. She played because she didn't want the piano inside her to stay silent anymore. But not everyone responded with kindness. Some people stared at her with shock, struggling to understand how someone they thought was ordinary could have such talent. They weren't ready to admit they had misjudged her. Wealthy people did not like being proven wrong. At the head of the table, Mr. Dalton sat frozen. His mouth was slightly open, as if he had forgotten how to speak. He had started the dare with the intention of humiliating Emma, of turning her into a joke. He had expected mistakes, awkwardness, embarrassment. He wanted to laugh at her. But now, after hearing her play, laughter was the last thing anyone could imagine. One of his business friends leaned over and whispered, "She played better than anyone I've heard in years." Another said, "You're lucky she didn't embarrass you. That could have gone very differently." Mr. Dalton clenched his jaw. He was not used to being the one who looked foolish. He tried to laugh it off, saying loudly, "Well, I suppose she rehearsed that 1,000 times." His voice sounded forced, and a few people exchanged uncomfortable glances. The truth was obvious. Emma hadn't played to impress him. She had played to impress no one. She simply let her music do what it always did, speak for her. As she cleared plates from another table, a woman with silver earrings stopped her. "How long have you been playing?" Emma answered honestly, "Since I was a child, I stopped a few years ago." "Why?" the woman asked, curious. Emma hesitated. "Life got complicated." The woman nodded, understanding more than she said. Sometimes the short answer said everything. A man nearby added, "You shouldn't be working here, you should be performing." Emma didn't respond. She didn't agree or disagree. She simply continued working, because life didn't magically change in one evening just because people finally saw her differently. But as she walked away, she heard the man whisper to his wife, "How many people like her are ignored in places like this? How many talents are wasted because people assume they know everything about someone just from their job?" Meanwhile, the restaurant manager stood in the doorway, stunned. He had always known Emma was quiet and hardworking, but he had never expected her to be gifted. He felt guilty for never asking who she was, what she dreamed of, or what she used to love. He had hired her to refill glasses, not realizing she was capable of filling hearts. Even the workers who knew Emma were shocked. They had served next to her for years and none of them knew. One cook whispered to another, "She never said a word, not one word." The other replied, "Maybe because nobody ever asked." Emma walked into the kitchen to take a breath. She stood there, hands on the counter, eyes closed. She didn't cry. She didn't shake, she only breathed deeply, letting the music settle inside her again. She hadn't planned to play that night. She hadn't wanted to accept the dare. But when she sat at the piano, something opened inside her, something she didn't realize was still alive. And now the results of her choice were all around her. People weren't just impressed. They were humbled. They had watched someone they underestimated turn a public humiliation into a beautiful performance. They didn't expect that from a waitress. They didn't expect grace, confidence, or talent. Wealthy people often believed that greatness came only from places of privilege. But Emma had shown them something different. Greatness can come from anywhere. When she returned to the dining room, someone clapped again, softly, respectfully. Others followed. The applause was gentler this time, more heartfelt. It wasn't shock anymore, it was appreciation. Emma didn't bow. She didn't act like a performer. She simply smiled, grateful and quiet. She didn't need to be dramatic. She had already spoken through music. Across the room, Mr. Dalton sat silently, staring at his glass. He finally muttered, "I owe her $1,000. His voice sounded bitter, as if paying the money hurt more than being proven wrong. One guest replied, "You owe her more than that." The words hung in the air, heavy with truths. Emma continued working, but she wasn't the same girl who started the shift. She walked with a little more confidence, not proudly but peacefully. She didn't need everyone's approval. She didn't need their praise. She only needed to know one thing: she had not lost her ability. Her music was still alive. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, her dreams weren't completely gone. What she didn't know was that tonight was only the beginning. Her performance didn't just move people emotionally. It changed them. It made them see her with new eyes, and it made them wonder what other hidden talents existed in the people they ignored every day. After Emma's performance, the restaurant slowly returned to normal activity on the surface, but inside something had changed. The guests didn't talk as loudly as before. Their conversations were softer, slower, and more thoughtful. People looked at her differently now, not with superiority but with curiosity and quiet respect. Emma, however, didn't want to stay in the spotlight. As soon as she finished her shift, she went home, tired and overwhelmed. She didn't sleep much that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the music again. Not just the sound of the piano, but the feeling of it, like her heart had finally spoken a language she had forgotten. The next day at work, she expected the excitement to die down, but instead whispers followed her everywhere. "That's her, the waitress who played last night. She could be a professional musician. Why is she working here?" Some people were kind, while others treated her like a new curiosity, a piece of entertainment they wanted more of. Emma didn't enjoy attention. She had spent years trying to disappear into normal life, and suddenly she felt exposed. During lunch, a waiter named Marco teased her gently. "So Emma, are you going to quit your job and become famous?" Emma laughed a little. Famous people don't live in tiny apartments and run to catch buses. Marco shrugged. "Well, famous people don't hide in kitchens either." Emma looked down, uncomfortable. She wished people would stop asking questions she didn't know how to answer. Later that night, the restaurant was busy again. Expensive suits, sparkling dresses, glasses of wine, and the sound of cutlery filled the beautifully decorated space. But underneath all this elegance, a new energy existed. People kept glancing at the piano as if waiting to see if it would happen again. Mr. Dalton arrived late, just as he always did, but tonight he didn't walk in confidently. He walked in quietly with a serious expression. He didn't crack jokes, he didn't brag about money, he didn't smirk at Emma. He looked uncomfortable, as if carrying an invisible weight. After he sat down, he called Emma over. His voice was low and stiff. "I owe you $1,000, he said, almost whispering. Emma shook her head. "You don't have to." "Yes," he interrupted, placing the money on the table. "I do." The gesture didn't feel generous. It felt like an admission of defeat. The man who once towered above everyone now seemed smaller. Not physically, but emotionally. People at the table watched the exchange with quiet satisfaction, like they were witnessing karma happen in slow motion. Emma didn't want to embarrass him further. She took the money politely and said, "Thank you." Then she walked away before he could explain himself. For the rest of the evening, Mr. Dalton avoided eye contact with her. He didn't joke. He didn't tease, he didn't dare anyone to do anything. He stayed quiet, thoughtful, and oddly respectful. Meanwhile, other guests approached Emma with sincere interest. A woman told her she had a niece who played piano and asked if Emma taught lessons. A young couple said they recorded her performance and listened to it again the next morning because it made them feel peaceful. A man said her playing helped him remember his father, who used to listen to classical music. Emma wasn't used to hearing emotional stories from strangers. She didn't know how to respond, except with simple nods and gentle smiles. Later in the night, something surprising happened. A well-dressed man who had been sitting alone walked up to her. He looked older, his face lined with experience, his eyes calm but intense. "I don't want to disturb you," he said softly, "but I need to tell you something." Emma nodded, uncertain. "I'm a music director. I work with performing arts programs in schools. I have heard hundreds of musicians. Many are talented, but only a few have something deeper, something real. Last night you showed that." Emma stared at him, confused. "I'm not a musician anymore." He smiled. "Last night proved otherwise." She didn't know what to say, her throat tightened, her heart beat faster. The man continued, "If you ever want to play again properly on a real stage, please contact me." He handed her a business card with his name and number printed on it. "I don't pressure people, I don't chase talent. But I would hate to see yours disappear into a restaurant kitchen." Emma accepted the card carefully, like it was fragile. She didn't promise anything. She didn't commit. She just said, "Thank you." When he left, Emma slipped the card into her apron pocket, unsure whether she would ever use it. By the end of the night, people weren't just impressed, they were changed. They looked at Emma differently, but more importantly, they looked at themselves differently. They had always assumed that talent came packaged in fame, glamour, and wealth. They had never imagined that someone with extraordinary skill could be hiding in plain sight, cleaning tables and carrying trays. Emma didn't suddenly feel confident or powerful. She still felt scared, she still felt unsure. But something inside her had shifted. The music didn't feel like a lost dream anymore. It felt like a possibility. On her way home, she held the $1,000 tightly, not because she cared about the money, but because it symbolized victory, not over others but over her fear. She walked through the quiet streets, listening to the sound of her footsteps, imagining piano keys beneath her fingers. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. For the first time in years, she didn't feel small. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to think, maybe my story didn't end when I quit music. Maybe it was just waiting for a different beginning. The next few days at the restaurant felt different. Customers still came dressed in fancy clothes, still ordered expensive food and wine, still talked about money and business. But underneath all of that, something had shifted. People whispered less and listened more. They looked at Emma not with amusement or curiosity, but with respect. They didn't treat her like she was invisible anymore. Emma noticed the change, but she didn't act different. She still served tables, carried plates, and cleaned spills. She still worked long hours and went home tired, but something inside her felt lighter. She didn't feel trapped in the same way she once did. She had rediscovered a piece of herself, and that made the days easier to survive. One afternoon, the restaurant manager called Emma into his office. Emma walked in nervously, afraid she had done something wrong. Managers didn't usually call employees into private meetings unless there was a problem. He sat behind his desk, fingers nervously tapping on papers. He cleared his throat and tried to sound formal, but Emma could tell he was uncomfortable. "I want to talk to you about what happened the other night," he began. Emma nodded, waiting quietly. The manager continued, "I've been thinking a lot about it and I realized something important. I never asked about your life, your interests, or your past. I treated you like a machine, not a person." Emma blinked, surprised. She didn't expect an apology from someone in power. "I'm sorry for that," he said sincerely. Emma didn't know how to respond, so she simply said, "Thank you." Then the manager added, "Some customers asked if you could perform again. They said they would love to hear you play." Emma hesitated. "I don't want it to become a show." "What?" "I understand," the manager said. "I'm not asking you to perform for entertainment, only if you want to." Emma nodded, appreciating his respect, even if she wasn't ready to decide. Later that night, Emma was setting tables when the music director who had given her his card returned. He approached her politely and said, "I've been thinking about you." Emma looked up startled. He smiled, not in a strange way. "In a professional way." She relaxed slightly. He explained, "I manage a local performing arts center. We host concerts, workshops, auditions, and community events. I would like to offer you a chance to audition." What? Emma's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure she had the courage. She hadn't performed on a real stage in years. She wasn't even sure she remembered how. "I don't think I'm ready," she confessed. The director nodded. People rarely feel ready when something matters, but readiness is not about perfection. It's about willingness. She looked down, unsure. He continued, "You have something special. Most musicians can play notes. Very few can make people feel something. You have that gift. Don't waste it because you're scared." His words hit her deeply because they were true. Fear had stolen so much from her, her dreams, her opportunities, her confidence. She didn't want fear to steal more. Emma took the card out of her apron pocket. She had been carrying it for days, but she hadn't looked at it closely. Now she held it with trembling fingers as if she was finally seeing it properly. "What if I fail?" she whispered. The director smiled gently. "Then you'll learn failing doesn't make you small, hiding does." Emma nodded slowly, feeling something stir inside her, a quiet bravery she thought she'd lost. They agreed to meet for a private audition the following week. It wasn't a contract or a guarantee, just an opportunity, one she had never expected to receive. That night, Emma walked home feeling terrified and excited at the same time. She remembered all the years she spent hiding from music, all the nights she cried because she didn't know how to carry the weight of her life, all the moments she tried to pretend that her talent didn't matter. But now someone believed in her, someone who knew music, who understood talent, who saw beyond her uniform. And suddenly her dream didn't feel impossible anymore, it felt fragile but real. When she got home, her younger sister Lily ran to her with a smile. "Guess what? I saw a video of you playing piano at your job. People online love it." Emma froze. "There's a video?" Lily nodded happily. "Yes, someone filmed you. It has thousands of views." Emma's stomach twisted. She didn't want fame. She didn't want strangers analyzing her life. But Lily hugged her tightly and said, "I'm proud of you. Dad would be proud too." Those words melted her fear. Emma closed her eyes, taking in the comfort of her sister's arms. Later that night, Emma sat alone in the living room, imagining herself walking onto a stage. She imagined lights, audience, nerves, everything she once dreamed of. It didn't feel like a fantasy anymore. It felt like a possibility. She whispered to herself, maybe I can do this. But her journey was not just about music. It was about reclaiming confidence, rebuilding identity, and rewriting a story she thought had ended. At the restaurant, people continued to talk about her performance. They didn't just admire her talent, they admired her courage. When they looked at her now, they didn't see a waitress. They saw someone with a story, with depth, with gifts hidden beneath years of silence. Even Mr. Dalton behaved differently. He didn't tease her anymore. He didn't dare her. He didn't talk to her like she was beneath him. He spoke politely, even humbly. Wealth couldn't buy him dignity, but Emma's music had forced him to find some. Emma didn't perform again at the restaurant. She didn't need to. Her first performance wasn't entertainment, it was transformation. The upcoming audition scared her more than anything she had faced, but she knew something important now. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is walking forward even when fear whispers stop, and Emma was ready to walk forward. Maybe slowly, maybe shakily, but forward, because she had finally remembered who she wanted to be. The day of the audition arrived quietly, without excitement or celebration. There were no crowds cheering, no friends taking photos, and no luxury like the restaurant full of wealthy guests. It was just Emma, standing alone outside a building she had never entered before, the local Performing Arts Center. The center was large but welcoming, with posters of musicians, actors, and dancers on the walls. It smelled of polished wood and old instruments. A place designed for dreams, not for money or ego. Emma stood at the entrance holding a small bag, her palms sweaty, her heart beating much faster than usual. She had spent the past week practicing whenever she could, late at night, early in the morning, whenever the house was quiet. She didn't have a real piano at home, only a cheap keyboard with missing keys, but she used it anyway. She practiced not to be perfect, but to remember who she used to be. Every time she touched the keys, memories came back, both joyful and painful, and she let them teach her instead of break her. She wasn't performing for approval. She wasn't performing to win, she was performing to reclaim her voice. Inside the building, she met the music director who had invited her. He greeted her warmly, with no pressure or expectation. He didn't treat her like she was fragile, but like she was capable. Just relax, he said softly. This is not a test. This is a conversation between you and the piano. Emma nodded, taking a deep breath. She followed him into a quiet room with a grand piano in the center. The instrument looked beautiful, polished, loved, cared for, nothing like the dusty piano at the restaurant. She ran her fingers across the lid, feeling the smooth wood. She felt intimidated but also honored. She sat down and closed her eyes for a moment. She thought about her father, her mother, and her sister. She thought about the sacrifices, the struggles, and the reasons she stopped playing. Then she thought about the night she performed at the restaurant, the silence, the shock, the applause, and how it reminded her that her story wasn't finished. Emma started playing. It was a slow, emotional piece. Every note was honest, fragile, and full of feeling. She didn't play perfectly. Her fingers slipped once. She missed a key. But she didn't stop. She let the mistake become part of the music. She let imperfection be beautiful. The director sat in the corner, listening silently. He didn't take notes or judge her technique. He watched her expression, her emotion, the way she breathed through the music. He saw something rare, someone who didn't just play sound but played life. When Emma finished, her hands were trembling. She looked up, nervous about what he would say. The room felt too quiet, too heavy with expectation. The director smiled gently. Emma, you don't play like someone who quit, you play like someone who survived. Tears welled in Emma's eyes, but she held them back. He continued, I don't need to hear more. I want you to join our program. You will start small local performances, lessons, maybe some community concerts, nothing overwhelming. We will build slowly. Emma stared at him, shocked. Are you sure? He nodded. I don't chase talent, but I invite it when I see it, and I see it in you. It took Emma a moment to understand his words. After years of carrying trays, washing dishes, and hiding her talent, someone was offering her an opportunity, not because they pitied her, but because they respected her. When she stepped outside the building, the world looked brighter. Not because everything was perfect, but because something had changed inside her. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She wasn't just someone who used to dream. She was someone who had a future again. She walked to the bus stop, holding the acceptance paper in her hands, reading it repeatedly. She couldn't stop smiling, not the big kind of smile that shows teeth, but a quiet smile, the kind that comes from peace. That evening when Emma went to work, she didn't tell anyone what happened. She didn't brag or show off. She simply did her job as usual, serving food, clearing tables, answering questions. But this time there was a light in her eyes that nobody had seen before. Some customers asked, "Are you going to play again tonight?" Emma shook her head kindly, "Not tonight." People looked disappointed, but they respected her answer. They understood she wasn't entertainment on command. She was an artist, and artists chose when to share their voice. Mr. Dalton walked in later that night. He saw Emma and nodded awkwardly. There was no arrogance, no jokes, no cruel dares, just humility. He quietly left a large tip at the end of his meal with a note that said, "I was wrong. Thank you for reminding me that talent doesn't depend on money." Emma folded the note and placed it in her pocket, not because she needed the words, but because it showed that even the proudest people could change. At the end of the shift, Emma stood near the piano again. She touched it gently, remembering how a simple dare had changed her life. She didn't resent the past anymore. She didn't fear the future. She didn't regret the years she lost. She simply understood that life unfolds in unexpected ways. She whispered to the piano, "Thank you." Not for applause, not for opportunity, but for helping her rediscover a part of herself she thought was gone forever. Emma walked out of the restaurant that night, not as a waitress with secret dreams, but as a musician stepping into a new chapter. Her journey had not been easy. It had been messy, painful, and unfair. But she learned something powerful. Failures don't define you. Circumstances don't define you. Money doesn't define you. Passion, courage, and persistence do. Emma didn't need a grand stage to be extraordinary. She only needed a piano and a moment. And when that moment came, the whole room gasped. And when that moment came, the whole room gasped.